In order to maintain balance, you have to accept that there are two sides to every story. Last week we heard one of them, and this week we discuss another masked man, Shen, Eye of Twilight. Welcome to Runeterra Tourist. I'm Patrick. I don't know anything about these people yet, so let's learn about them together. When this video comes out, it'll be the start of Vendetta pre-Rift season, so many happy returns to everybody who celebrates. A little confetti effect here. Shen is of the Calm and Order domains, or green and yellow, however you want to look at it. And with Vendetta introducing these rival domain pairings, it's awfully convenient that he's the exact opposite of Zed, who is of Fury and Chaos, or Red and Purple. It's kind of what me and the rest of the community anticipated, given his whole identity around balance. And so having Order, Chaos being rivals with one another, it made a lot of sense. It was pretty much what we were expecting here. Shen is the quiet champion. He's never really flashy, he's not controversial, and he's one of the original legends created back in 2010. So he's consistently described as pretty much honorable to a fault. His mains are patient, team-first players given his League of Legends abilities, and they also recognize that he has a deceptively high skill ceiling. Nobody really hates Shen. He's a great team player. Now, there's a lot of overlap between Shen's and Zed's stories, and I guess Jin's too, kind of. So I'll try not to duplicate efforts that much in this episode. Be sure to check out the Zed and Jin episodes for their perspectives on all the events that happen. As for what's Shen's side of the story, well, before we get into all that, let's do the whole like and subscribe thing below if you could take a second, and if you're watching on mobile, give it a hype because it helps this channel grow and I would be greatly appreciative of it. Alright, so let's dive into the lore. Shen is the son of Great Master Kuzhou, the Eye of Twilight, and was raised inside the Kinkou order. And it was there that he immersed himself in the Order's culture, where he discovered that he had the strong connection with the spirit realm. He was highly regarded by his instructors and raised top marks, and eventually he was training alongside an orphan boy that his father took in, one of the servants inside the monastery, Gavos. Shen was easily able to defeat him every match, though the orphan boy would continue to rise and demand a rematch each time. Kuzhou offered guidance on how to counter Shen's strikes, and after seeing the determination of his competitor, Shen finally allowed this kid to land a blow against him. Yeah, sure, it's allowed. Kuzhou took the young boy under his wing, and from that point forward, Shen and Gavos would train as rivals, competitors, but also friends and brothers. Years later, when the Council of Jun sent an envoy to Master Kuzhou, begging him for assistance in defeating the infamous supernatural killer known as the Golden Demon, Kuzhou agreed, and he brought Shen and Gavos along with him to create this covert investigation, as any father would with his teenage sons. The investigation spanned 4 years, and while I described all of this in last week's episode with Zed, this is what it did to Shen. During this time, Kuzhou arranged a marriage between Shen and Yevnai, and while Shen loved the girl, during their trip to Kotha village, he confided in Gavos that he wasn't sure the feelings were mutual, and Gavos reassured him in sentiments that absolutely will hold up later in the story. At Kotha village, they arrived to see a complete massacre by the demon, and while Gavos worked desperately to save as many people as he could, Shen, I don't know, he was just there? Didn't really describe anything that he did. It was this hustle and ambition that led Kuzhou to name Gavos, not Shen, as the next Eye of Twilight, and gave him the name Usan. Kuzhou discovered a pattern in the killings and realized they weren't hunting a demon, but rather a wicked man or a Vastaya. And so, believing that this was outside the Kinkou's mandate, he wanted to hand this investigation off to someone else, but Usan and Shen decided that they wanted to continue after all they had been through, and so they protested and the investigation continued. They eventually tracked the killer to Jom Pass, and Usan allowed himself to be captured in this carefully prepared trap that was made by the brothers. And so Usan used his necklace as a homing beacon of sorts and allowed Kuzhou and Shen to rescue him, Shen barging through the wall Kool-Aid Man style to save his brother. In the aftermath, it was clear Kuzhou was proven right and that this was not a demon but rather a human stagehand from a traveling theater named Kata Jin. And when Kuzhou spared Jin, the brothers thought that this killer deserved a far greater punishment. But Shen accepted the decision anyway, and he tried to comfort Usan, but Usan could not be consoled. Later, when Noxus invaded and the Kinkou masters, Kuzhou, Kennen, and Mayym, ruled neutrally, Shen appeared to accept this and support their decision. However, he secretly snuck out to train Ionian soldiers and raid Noxian supply lines while Usan covered for him, deliberately throwing their sparring matches so Shen's absences wouldn't be noticeable. Ah, how the turntables turn. Shen focused on maintaining Ionia's spiritual harmony, but as the war raged on, he felt this imbalance within the order, sensing a disturbance in the force. Ooh, that's the wrong IP. Yeah, definitely wrong IP. He rushed back to the temple only to find that it fell to a bloody coup. Many Kinkou were slaughtered, including Shen's father, and all at the hands of Usan's new order, the Order of Shadow, as Usan now began calling himself Zed. So Shen led the Kinkou to the safety of the mountains. He took up his father's spirit blade and inherited the title of Eye of Twilight, vowing to restore the order. The Kinkou were fractured now, and while he attempted to recruit and train new members in order to rebuild its strength, many were not fully in support of this new leader. And also, it was during this time that Shen had to break off his engagement with Yevnai due to taking up this new role that he allegedly didn't want, according to Yevnai. He rebuilt the Kinkou from the survivors, along with the assistance of Kennen, Mayym, and eventually Mayym's daughter Akali, who became his student. After the Noxian invasion ended, many Ionians celebrated their hard-won victory, but not Shen. He struggled with this hatred that he had for Zed and doubting his leadership abilities, fearing that the Kinkou, as they are currently rebuilt, would not be able to restore balance to the First Lands. One such instance involved a fisherman in need of aid who reported that his ship was attacked by demons, and while taking down this man's account, a holy man and his acolytes arrived, declaring that they would defeat the spirit themselves. That's a good sign. Shen tracked the demon to its resting place, and he was ready to strike it down when he heard the cries of these dying spirits. So he teleported back to the shipwreck, and he found that the holy man and his crew were annihilating innocent spirits. And so the holy man had asked Shen if he would want to take the next kill, which Shen did, to kill the holy man instead, insisting on restoring the balance. Also during this time, Akali had proved herself worthy of becoming the new Fist of Shadow. However, she was a bit too restless and believing that Shen was holding her back, so she began to argue with him and disobey orders. And eventually, the disciple left the order, and the only ones left to lead the Kinkou were Kennen and Shen. Shen shows up in Akali's story later, but I'll leave that for a future episode. For now, we've got more fish to fry. Before that took place, the spirits of Olgathi Forest were angered, and so Shen traveled there to pacify them. And so he slayed one of the spirits, when was soon joined by Akali, who informed him that Zed had slain Master Althon nearby. But despite her urgings, Shen refused to join her, warning against acting on revenge and instead deciding to head south to stop a demon attack. Shen was just trying to have a nice meal at the White Cliffs Inn when he noticed that the shadows were acting a little suspiciously. And so he calls out to Zed, who walks in disguised poorly as a merchant and not buying the act, and also after telling Akali not to act on vengeance, attacks Zed on an act of vengeance. Zed eventually asks Shen for his help against an escaped Jin, but Shen refuses, insisting that he's going to find Jin himself then, and suddenly, bound by a code of honor, he lets the man he just fought walk out in peace. When Akali disobeys Shen and attacks Zed, Shen restrains her, telling her that this was his fight alone. And so now he's angry as Zed disappears into the shadows and declares war on Zed. Not confusing to follow this line of thinking at all. I mean, maybe he was just hangry. In Nanthi, he catches sight of Zed and begins chasing him down, but Zed was in pursuit of Jin, and so he tries to warn Shen about all of the rigged lanterns that are set as traps by Jin, and Shen ignores him and then moments later nearly dies in blasts. Zed saves him and shoves him into the sea, then drags him back to shore. Shen's response when waking is to draw his blade on Zed, insisting that he knew about Jin setting off the traps because Jin was watching them and he was the real target. Sure, whatever. Zed tried to hint that Jin was working for someone else and that he reminded Shen of the lesson their father had taught them about the rules of scales, how the sacrifice of one could save the many. But Shen flipped that on him and said that they were actually taught to only act when necessary, and that Zed had failed the Kinkou and Kusho due to his impatience. After calling Zed's bluff about attacking him with shadow clones, Shen begins to beat down Zed tearfully and denounces him for killing his father, and then he begins to capture Zed, saying that he's going to burn the shadow magic out of him and let him rot in prison. 2 days later, Shen confronts Zed, saying that he knew Zed was holding back and allowed himself to get captured, which sure. And then Zed tries again with the hints of who helped Jin escape, which Shen admits that he hadn't really given it much thought, but he was willing to work with Zed as long as Zed would confess as to why he killed their father. Shen saw through Zed's lies about needing the Tears of Shadow in order to stop Noxus, as well as Kusho stopping him, and then also lying about how he thought that Kusho loved Shen more and he was jealous of that. So eventually Zed finally admits that in order to save Ionia, he needed to create this order that would protect the Kinkou's sacred mission and become an enemy to them so that they wouldn't follow him with these Tears of Shadow. But just as they get on cordial terms, they immediately begin fighting over what they should do about Jin should he be captured. Good grief. Shen informed Zed that Akali was tracking down Jin, who had escaped to Piltover, and during their travels there, Zed tries one more time to see if Shen has figured out who allowed Jin to escape. But Shen dismisses this as well. Oh, good God, man, just tell him already, Zed. Just tell him. Akali was caught in one of Jin's traps, and so Shen and Zed managed to barely rescue her and corner Jin to capture him. Jin taunts Zed about knowing who allowed him to be freed and that Zed knew, and angry about this whole order, Zed flings Jin's body to Shen's feet, says, "Do whatever you want with him," and then leaves. So I'll be honest, Shen's lore was a little difficult to work with because he's got multiple authors working across his backstory, the short stories, and his appearances in other champion stories. And so the result is that you have this character who shifts depending on which story you're reading. In The Man with the Steel Cane, he's calm and reserved, and he's able to hold his emotion back when he's encountering Zed, being able to think rationally. And in the comics, he's basically yelling in every panel. The Kinkou doctrine has the same problem because they fight demons and spirits, not humans. Unless those humans disrupt the balance between the mortal and spirit realms. But the Noxian invasion of the First Lands does disrupt the balance, and yet they don't fight the Noxians right away. Which raises a question the lore never really answers. What does balance really mean to them? And where is the line? It reads like Riot could never really settle on one version of Shen, and so they decided to keep all of them. And so there's this strong outcry from the community to actually do more with Shen. The Kinkou doctrine also feels a little underexplained, and so there's a version of this character where an internal struggle over what balance actually is the story. And I think that would be way more interesting rather than something that just happens off screen. What does hold up is the shape of his story. This idea that a man who lost his father, this title that he inherited and he wasn't really chosen for, and has spent all of this time, all of his appearances, not acting on revenge, but trying to focus on restraint, and everyone around him knowing a little bit of something that he doesn't, in a very Scotty doesn't know kind of moment. I mean, this pretty much lands regardless of who's writing him. But hopefully the cards have something better in store for us. Shen is a protector, this steadfast defensive tank in League of Legends. His abilities generate shields for his allies and himself, and his Shadow Dash taunts enemies, forcing them to attack him instead of whoever they were going after. His ultimate, Stand United, is the defining one. This allows him to channel a massive shield onto any ally anywhere on the map, and then he teleports to their side. In Legends of Runeterra, Shen is more of an Ionian support champion unit built around the barrier keyword, this ability that grants allies protective barriers, leveling up after shielding them, and then making the shielded allies hit harder. So it's the same protective identity, but more as like a buff support. A lot in his Riftbound kit cares about being played along with another card or having effects that are generated as long as you're with one other unit. So keep that in mind as we look into these cards. So we start with the legend Shen, Eye of Twilight, which has the action, exhaust this to give a friendly unit tank this turn. So it must be assigned combat damage first. So the mapping is fairly clean, right? This follows his League of Legends Shadow Dash that taunts, so it forces enemies to attack him, and his W creates the protective zone around his allies. And so granting tank designates a protector who must absorb all the damage first. So it's essentially his entire kit's philosophy of just he deciding where the damage is going to be applied. So it being action speed kind of helpful because it works in showdowns, and it affects the combat math that your opponent's going to always have to take into consideration, and it's free to activate. There's no energy costs, there's nothing else other than it being a repeatable ability once it's readied. So it's honest, functional, unflashy, very Shen. His signature spell is a 2 energy, 1 power costs spell that is move an enemy unit to a battlefield where you have units. If you have exactly 2 units there, they each get +1 might this turn, and it has the new flow ability, which costs 5 energy and 2 power. So this allows you to play it from your trash for its flow cost, and then it gets banished. So this is named after his E in League of Legends, which allows the Shen player to dictate the fight on his terms a little bit with proper planning. But funny enough, in League of Legends, casting Shadow Dash moves Shen, not an enemy unit, so this is a little different in that capacity, and it doesn't get recast in League of Legends, so you can cast other abilities during the Shadow Dash, but just not Shadow Dash itself. I'll get into my thoughts on the card a little bit later, but as you can see, it's got the 2 units there text, so something else to be very mindful of, that it has a very, very strict limitation on it. His rare champion unit out of Calm is a 6 might unit that costs 5 energy and 1 calm power for Shen, Scourge of Shadows, with a text, when I hold, if there is exactly 1 other unit you control here, draw 1. So it's a solid body with the hold with a partner condition in an interesting, I guess, key barrier kind of effect, sort of. But how often are you going to be able to trigger this? Because this is really conditional. And so it feels a little unreliable. Plus, I'm having a really difficult time figuring out what League of Legends ability this actually holds to or maps to. So yeah, it just seems like it was kind of pasted on. And finally, we get to the epic champion unit out of Order. This is Shen, leader of the Kinkou Order. It's a 7 might unit that costs 6 energy and 2 order power, and has the abilities Shield, so it gets +1 might when it's a defender, and when I hold, if there is exactly 1 other unit you control here, you score 1 point. So Shield in tandem with the legend ability that grants tank makes this a pretty beefy boy, and given that his League of Legends whole strategy is about shielding allies, I mean, this kind of makes sense, and having him be a hold strategy feels very Shen-like, I suppose. This one is even more conditional than the rare at 2 order power on top of that. That's costly, and you know, holding is notoriously hard in this game, and so not only having that, but now pairing it with the pair condition is just feels like you're handing the opponents the off switch to all of his abilities. Just kill a unit or make sure that it's got 3 units there at the battlefield, and he's completely shut down with those effects. So it feels like the cost is pretty steep and the effect is very, very difficult. I mean, it's the same thing that you get with his signature spell too, of it being kind of hard to trigger efficiently. But what does this all look like put together? So Shen runs Calm and Order, or green and yellow, and he is basically a hold and protect deck. So establishing exactly 2 units at battlefields, using the Legend's tank ability to manipulate the damage math, and then using Shadow Dash to control when attacks are going to happen and those combat showdowns that you want to happen on your terms. And then I guess using the epic rare to get extra points. The deck's whole theory seems to be you can't remove the right unit when you want to because I'm going to dictate who gets combat damage, and you've got cards like Charm and Defy if they're going to try to do anything extra. And the whole meta's response is going to be just removal dense purple cards that just bounce units back to hand, or yellow that can also have you kill units. So it's kind of a non-starter. Damage-based removal, especially from red, is kind of taking a back seat, but there are a good number of other answers. I mean, yellow, as I've mentioned, and in this set there are units that move in and deal damage, so there's a lot of stuff already that you're going to have to deal with. This just kind of feels really difficult to manage for Shen. The pairing condition is just way too fragile. Either opponents are going to kill one unit to turn that off, or if you're trying to prepare and have 3, they'll just let you have 3 units at a battlefield, so then all your effects break. Thematically, I suppose this kind of ties along with Key Barrier, this idea that it's reducing the cooldown effects for this protective shield if one other ally is positively influenced, but otherwise this is a detail that's a little weird to have such a big influence on Shen's entire kit. And the rates feel way too expensive for champion units that are really clunky and finicky, so poor Shen, I feel like he got really hard done by, in my opinion here. I mean, the community is already flambeing his signature spell as a worst charm and discipline, so I feel like this is really just a case of flavor over function. And speaking of, in the sense of the lore, I mean, this is the same thought that I had with Zed last week, is the idea that who doesn't love a ninja story, right? But it's really interesting that Riot hasn't done as much as they possibly could with Shen, which is saying a lot considering he's in so many backstories already. But to me, I feel like he's underutilized just because with all these writers, no one's really settled on who he is or what the Kinkou order actually stands for. There's a lot of room to explore there with his backstory, but what I was genuinely surprised by is this idea that his cards actually kind of feel thematically relevant to him. I mean, the pairing motif aside, the tank grants and the idea of scoring by holding instead of conquering definitely kind of felt more of a nod to his character, this character that protects rather than attacks. Riot's card team looked at this mess of short stories and were able to develop a clear identity out of it. Now, will it be relevant in the Riftbound meta? That remains to be seen, but hey, at least they found something that was thematically appropriate for this guy. To all the Shen mains out there, what drew you to him in the first place? Do you think he was portrayed accurately in Riftbound? And do you feel okay about the direction that Riot's gone with him and his backstory? Let me know in the comments below. New episodes drop weekly, so subscribe if these lore dives sound like your kind of a thing, and like and do the hype thing if you're watching on mobile. Anyway, until next time, thanks for watching.